Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 63. I am your host, Christian Sanger, and your guest this week is Ray Murphy. He is a Marine veteran who founded the Warriors Healing Network. It's a nonprofit that helps facilitate psychedelic treatments to combat veterans and police officers who have been diagnosed with PTSD and require financial assistance to get the help they need to fight for their lives. So yes, that's right. We are talking about psychedelics today and ayahuasca, but I promise you, it's probably going to be a little different than what you may have in your mind. There's a lot of misconceptions out there. I had them myself as someone who's never done any psychedelics, and to be honest, is afraid of what I've heard about them from people I know who have done them in their past. But there's been a lot of studies over the years showing how this can be beneficial to people, especially those suffering from mental illness. And it's really fascinating to hear someone who's been through these treatments and now has a nonprofit dedicated to helping those that protect us, those in the armed forces, those who are police officers. And again, there's a lot to it. I learned a lot. There may be some people who have to keep an open mind, but I think most people who listen to this show already have an open mind and are interested in these things. And I think it's a really fascinating conversation about an alternative method that people are seeking for treatment and has been working for a lot of them. There's a lot to it, so definitely stick around and listen to that. Not much else going on. I just wanted to briefly, something that I've noticed over the last few days, when you hear this on Monday or whenever you do listen, some of these stories may have changed or maybe updates and things, but there's two things going on, one in the state and one nationally, that are just really frustrating to me. One is the frightening and horrific attack on Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul. I'm sure you've heard it by now. Again, more details have probably come out. From what we know, it sounds like this man broke into the Pelosi's home when Speaker Pelosi wasn't there, but he was looking for her and ended up attacking her husband with a hammer. Horrible, frightening things. And we're seeing more of these threats of violence and actual acts of violence against politicians. And it's both sides of the aisle, whether it's politically motivated or not. Rand Paul got into a fight with his neighbor a couple years ago, and he was injured. There's been people showing up outside the houses of Supreme Court justices or in all the threats and everything. All that's horrible. We all know that. That's that. And we can also talk about why these things are escalating and the types of folks who are responsible for it. No surprise, anything involving Nancy Pelosi or any politician for that matter, there's conspiracy theories already out there online, all these stupid, dumb things that are spun out by people who I'm pretty sure don't even believe it and just want to get people worked up and get these false stories out there. Not everything is a conspiracy theory, folks, and most things are not a conspiracy theory. There's been no evidence to any of these ridiculous things, and it doesn't matter. No matter how many police reports, court cases, everything that comes out, these things are never going to go away. So that's happening on the national level. More locally, and you can look up this information. I'm not going to name the person. But there was in South Carolina, a high school student, I believe she was 17, unexpectedly passed away. She was in like a band leader for her school. School announces it. Awful, sad, just terrible story. And I share it on my Twitter as it's a state story. And it's so sad. And nice to see the community, though, come together to try to honor this student that they lost. And, just a horrible, horrible story. And I get a couple responses, saying things like, oh, Google unexpected death and, oh, get the jab and this is what happens, like stuff like that, trying to say that this child, she was 17, died unexpectedly because they got the vaccine and this is what's happening, that children and high school students across the country are dying like crazy in record numbers, quote unquote, unexpectedly. And that's just code for it's because they got the vaccine. This is another conspiracy theory that's been out there since the beginning of vaccines coming out during the pandemic, amongst all the others you've heard of. And so, yes, if you Google that or search social media, you're going to find a bunch of stories that people have linked to where someone young has died unexpectedly. Now, of course, when you dive into these stories, a lot of the times you'll find out that a cause of death was released later, or people got fed up with these lies and conspiracy theories spread around, and the family would come out and say what actually happened when they tried to keep it private originally. And so, there's these two stories where one is national, and I understand it's going to happen, and I know politicians know these things are going to happen to them. But then you have one locally where this child's family didn't ask for this. And I don't know how much they're seeing this. Like I said, it was a couple tweets to me. And then when I kind of looked into it to look up the story, there's already these like random websites out there that are trying to link this unexpected death to somehow being tied to the vaccine, even though there's been no announcement, no announcement period about what the cause of death is, let alone anything that could tie it to anything else. So I don't know if the family's seeing this. I'm sure other family members who have had their kids die unexpectedly have been seeing this. What kind of person are you to do these things? To pass on these false narratives, I don't know, because you want to like own the libs, or, oh, I told you the vaccine was bad, and you're just like trying to prove that it is when there's no evidence whatsoever. Again, we want to talk about conspiracy theories, you do you, but when you're bringing in like a family that didn't ask for this, like it's disgusting. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And we've seen what these types of theories and spreading them can do. I think that's probably what led directly to the attack on Paul Pelosi, what was meant to be Nancy Pelosi, because these types of conspiracy theories and rhetoric about cabals and the government is secretly doing this and they've rigged the election and they did this. This is what happens, like these violent attacks happen. And then on the other side, you have this family that's mourning. And again, I don't know that they specifically have seen any of this or been affected by it, but they could be. And it's just really sad to think about you're mourning your child who died for whatever reason, and you have to deal with these conspiracy theories and people saying that they died because of the vaccine. And, I wanted to respond to these people, but one, I didn't want to amplify what they were saying. And two, that just would lead to a conversation, like it's on Twitter, say, back and forth. And if we're discussing it, that's going to amplify it too. And there's just no need to do it. I would rather these people comment, and that's the end of it. No one interacts with them, and we don't further spread this stuff. I ask you all to keep those things in mind. When you see those comments from people, if you want to look into it, you can. You'll find there is absolutely no correlation between vaccines and unexpected deaths in this country. There's no proof of that. There's nothing. And spreading that stuff is harmful for many reasons, but especially for that family. And again, I don't know the cause of death. You know why I don't? Because none of the articles say it. The family has chosen not to release it. And so we don't know. But how would you feel if the reason they're not releasing it is this family member died by suicide, say, and I want to keep that private? That is their business. And even if it's not anything like that, even if it's something else, any other medical condition whatsoever, they just don't want to release the information. That is their right to do so. And speculating and passing on conspiracy theories is just so disgusting. And like I said, I was seeing all this Paul Pelosi stuff, and it's a different story, but there's ties to it. And then seeing the similar types of things being said by adults randomly to me about a 17-year-old child who just died. And they're saying this in a public forum where anyone could see it. And it's just, I don't understand it. And it just feels really disgusting and gross to me. And so I just kind of wanted to vent about it for a little bit. I don't know if you all have seen these things too, but the Pelosi stuff's hard to miss because it's everywhere and it's national. But these conspiracy theories and just dumb, just crap that people come up with for whatever reason with no basis. They are not the police. They haven't seen police reports. They're not involved with this family or these people at all. And they're just talking out of their ass. And I don't know. It's really been bothering me the last couple of days. So since I didn't have any specific stories to talk about, I just kind of wanted to rant on that for a little bit. So I appreciate you sticking with me. This week's episode, as I mentioned, is awesome. Got a great interview with Ray Murphy. I think he did an awesome job explaining what it is that his nonprofit Warriors Healing Network does and what they do not do. He also talked about some of the misconceptions about psychedelics and their use in a medical setting. And I think it was a really good conversation that I think will maybe change some minds, open some folks up to seeing what's out there, or those that already believed in this and want to help out our veterans and police officers who are having a hard time finding treatment for things like PTSD, finding the right thing that works for them. Maybe they'll support this local nonprofit or look into other methods to help those that serve us here in this country. So without any further delay, we'll get into the interview now. And I want to, again, thank Ray Murphy for taking the time. Here it is, our interview. And joining me now is this week's guest, Ray Murphy. He is a Marine veteran who founded the Warriors Healing Network, a nonprofit that helps facilitate psychedelic treatments to combat veterans and police officers who have been diagnosed with PTSD and may require financial assistance to get the help they need to fight for their lives. Sounds like an awesome organization, plus really fascinating the work you're doing, Ray. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today.
Yeah, Christian, I really appreciate it. A lot of people don't even know that this is an option for treatment, so I'm really happy to share this with them.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn a little bit about it. But before we get into the nonprofit and the work that you're doing, if you could just provide a little background about yourself, who you are, what your ties to Charleston are, or, just anything you think is important for people to know about you.
Yeah, sure. I grew up outside of Chicago, lived in California for a long time, and we moved to Charleston just about 2 years ago. When I grew up, I was in the Chicagoland area, but from there I went to the Marine Corps, served 4 years, became a criminal justice major through Illinois State University. Currently, I have multiple companies. I have Koru Canine, which is just a dog training company, getting dogs to behave for their owners. And then I also work with, I have a company called HRD Police Canine. I work with police canine units around the country. I teach them. We do high-risk deployment seminars, making sure that these dogs are street-worthy and they're ready to do their job if asked to. We've even done work with locally here with the Charleston PD canine unit. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Line of work. Get to teach dogs to not bite people and also teach dogs to bite people.
Yeah. So, bite people when they're supposed to. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
That's really cool. Yeah, I saw that when I was looking at the website for the nonprofit, your background, and I saw that you did work with canines, which I think is really fascinating as well. So you're doing lots of fun stuff. It seems some pretty cool work.
Yeah, I'm busy. I decided 2 companies wasn't enough, so I decided to start a nonprofit also.
Yeah, that can't be too much more work, right?
Right.
So speaking of the Warriors Healing Network, I kind of gave a little blurb at the top, but what led to the creation of this nonprofit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I personally had suffered from complex PTSD for quite a while. Unlike a lot of veterans and things like that, I would not say my PTSD came from my time in the service. I am also a skydiver and a base jumper, and I did that for several years. During that time, I lost a lot of friends. We're talking upwards of 30 plus fatalities, that were somehow close to me. And believe it or not, it took losing a dog unexpectedly. I had a dog named Nero that died about 5 years ago. And when he died, I just didn't bounce back. I didn't feel right. I just assumed I was depressed. I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't have a diagnosis of PTSD at any point. So I just, I tried all the common things that you would try out there. At some point, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I found that there's really not a lot of things that are effective to treat that type of stuff out there. And I could tell you every new thing you try that doesn't work just makes it worse. So knowing what our combat veterans and police officers are dealing with out there, I didn't want them to have to wait 5 years to figure out this puzzle. Last February, I finally went down to a retreat in Costa Rica called Rhythmia to do my first ayahuasca ceremonies. And I can tell you what, out of everything I've tried under the sun, that just blew me out of the water.
Wow.
It basically just it was like a hard reset. I was able to come back and do the integrative work and the stuff that matters, putting your negative thought patterns into a different light. And I felt like a different person. So I started the organization to cut that corner and basically give people a chance to kind of get back in the driver's seat and fight for their own lives. And I didn't want it to be cost prohibitive. And that's why we started the organization.
That's fascinating. And so for those who may not have heard of ayahuasca before, can you give kind of like a brief summary of what it is and what these retreats are like?
So ayahuasca has been used for hundreds of years in the Amazon region. Essentially, it's a vine that contains DMT, and the brew that's made with is a vine and some leaves that have to be coupled together for the DMT to actually work. It causes a psychedelic experience that's very different for every single person. What it is very good at is stripping down ego. If you have trauma buried in there, even stuff that you don't even remember, it's coming out. I could tell you I probably cried more in a week than I did in 30 years.
Wow.
And that's the type of stuff that you just can't do. When you go to normal therapy or any type of stuff like that, humans in general just mask things. You just don't come clean with everything that needs to be processed because it's painful. And I can tell you this, when you do these type of things, they have to be done with a lot of respect. Set and setting is super important, meaning who's administering it, where you're doing it. And you have to have some preparation work going down to do these type of things. And then more importantly, the integration work when you come back. What do? How do you process this experience that you just went through? That's very hard to articulate when you come out of these things. And what we've done is just kind of singled out a couple places that are medically licensed down in Costa Rica, and they're incredibly safe. Because the last thing I want is anybody going down there being, concerned about their safety or, worried about a language barrier or any type of stuff like that. That's what we've selected a couple places to send our veterans and police.
And, for those listening who may not be familiar, ayahuasca is something that can't be done here legally anyway in America. So that's why you're taking these trips. Number one, number two, the place, like you mentioned, they've been doing it for however many years and they're trained on it. And I think people listening, they associate psychedelics, with shrooms or something, and or similar drugs, and that have been used recreationally for however long. And they haven't. There's a lot of new studies and things going on now, so a lot of people are really unsure about this stuff because they've associated it with one thing, and now you see people doing treatments with psychedelics, people doing ketamine treatments, all with doctors, and I think some people still are a little worried about that. So it's good that, number one, you're providing this kind of, here's what to expect, here are the professionals that are doing this, and here's what will happen coming out of it, and really taking away any concerns they may have.
Yeah, and if you look at, there's been a lot of stuff out there. Joe Rogan podcast has given us a lot of mileage as far as talking about psychedelics and PTSD. And Netflix recently had a documentary out there called How to Change Your Mind. And it explains you why, these things got kind of bastardized and pushed off to the shadows, kind of during the counterculture period. But now this stuff is there's so many positive things that are coming out of using this stuff in the realm of PTSD and depression and stuff like that you can't ignore. MAPS is probably the largest organization that's doing any kind of real studies, and they currently have MDMA in phase 3 trials. So it's very close to being legalized in general, just for use in a therapeutic way. Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is, if we legalized it tomorrow, we've been at war for 20 plus years. The backlog of people trying to get into these programs would be through the roof.
Oh, I'm sure.
So it's just like turning around a ship. And there's people that need this help now. Mm-hmm. And there's not too many organizations in this space. There are a few. There's Vet Solutions. There's Heroic Hearts. Those are a little more directed toward kind of our tier 1 operators out there. We just broadened our scale a little bit to any combat veterans and also to police officers, because I do work with police units around the country. I wanted to make sure that they have the opportunity to get this help if they need it.
So you mentioned part of the work is finding some folks who may need an alternative form of therapy or treatment that they haven't experienced yet. Maybe whatever they've tried before just isn't working for them. So they're interested in this, and then you're able to get them on retreats and things like that. Are there other services that you provide, or is that pretty much it? Trying to get people to these places.
Well, the full treatment grant, if somebody wasn't able to contribute at all financially, we would pay for everything, which would include prep work, working with an integration coach. So an integration coach is more or less a therapist or a counselor, but has experience with psychedelics, which is extremely important, when you're trying to piece together these experiences
Right,
and
right.
being able to turn your new thought patterns around. We're paying for these guys to go down to Costa Rica, either Rhythmia or Soltara, which are two of the best treatment centers in the world for this stuff. And during that week, they would do 4 ayahuasca ceremonies along with breath work and yoga and meditation and all sorts of stuff. It's basically little healing containers. And when they come back, we'd give them all that integrative work when they come home. So basically, we're giving them that hard reset so they can continue on their healing journey and hopefully be in a much better place for not only themselves, but their loved ones. I mean, you got to remember the toll that
Oh yeah.
PTSD takes on everybody associated with anybody with this type of condition.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of mental health issues, disorders, whatever people are dealing with, can affect everyone, whether it's
Yeah, and the
addiction,
one thing you got to
PTSD,
remember,
etc.
yeah, about PTSD is something not for everybody. Is it a flash to bang type scenario? Meaning there's a traumatic effect or event, and immediately you have PTSD. Sometimes it's just a slow erosion in your nervous system that causes you to wake up 10 years later and say,
Mm.
what happened? I don't feel like the same person. How did I get here?
Yeah,
And this is why it affects veterans so much. I mean, you're in the high state of readiness. You're dealing with all this constant stress. Same thing with police. And you sprinkle in a couple traumatic events in there, then of course, at some point your body just cannot take that stuff or doesn't respond as well to those things as they did before, and it catches people off guard.
I think it's good that
So
you mentioned that because, yeah, when I was reading your, the bio on your website, it just, mentioned that you are a Marine veteran, which thank you, by the way, for your service. And I just assumed, oh, this must, and it said that you had have PTSD. And I was like, oh, it must be related to the service because you hear so much about that. And it's good to know that, no, it's not always that. It can be a combination of things, and it's not just one big traumatic event and then you have PTSD the next day. It could be a slow build, like you said. It's and no treatment works, which is why we're talking about these. Well, maybe some folks would call them alternative treatment methods. It's not everything works for everybody the same when it comes to these types of illnesses.
yeah, absolutely. At least this isn't a magic bullet. You have to put in the work.
Mm.
I will tell you straight out of the gate, it doesn't taste great. It tastes like you're drinking bark. There's definitely side effects. I mean, it's very common for people to purge on this stuff, meaning
Yeah.
they vomit and things like that. So you're not going down there for a pleasure cruise. That being said, it's bringing up past trauma.
Mm.
So, there's going to be a lot of crying. There's a lot of
Mm.
emotion involved with this stuff, but a lot of times that's the release you need. To let this stuff go and be able to look at things in a different light, so you're not constantly vigilant stuck in that red zone. Um, that's why it's so effective for this stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of people hear psychedelics and just assume you're going on this wild like drug binge and everything's great and you're having a blast. But I've seen documentaries and stuff on ayahuasca, and it looks like it is not always very pleasant, as you mentioned. And but that again, it's not supposed to be. This is how it works. And for some people, like you said, that temporary discomfort may have long-term effects that are super beneficial. And so for folks like yourself or anybody that you've helped go through these ceremonies or trips, once they've gone through it, they might see a benefit. Is that a long-term benefit? Is this something where they may have to come back and do a ceremony again, or what has your experience been?
It really depends on the person, but the most important part is when you come back. I mean, the medicine will give you what you need, not necessarily what you want.
Mm.
Meaning it's gonna lay out some paths for you, and you have to make some life changes. I mean, you can't keep doing the same thing in life and expect that a different result. So it's going to take some work, and this is why working with an integration coach is so important. We have one of the best ones in the country, in my opinion. Her name is Christina Muncie. She has a website called seekingsantosha.com. She's the one who's working with our veterans. She's working with me. I still work with her to this day, just because every now and then I kind of need to check in with myself and make sure I'm staying the right path. I can tell you the afterglow when you come home from a retreat like that is very intense, and it lasts for several months. It's really up to you to kind of take that and run with it and make sure that that becomes your lifestyle and you don't revert back to old habits. I think a lot of people get stuck in this identity of being a veteran with PTSD, and this is who I am, and it justifies their reckless behavior or all that type of stuff, and without saying even attempting to make change. And I don't think that's right either. You really have to put in some work. In fact, when we vet applicants for this type of thing, we make that abundantly clear that you're going to have to put in some work here and endure some hardship, but the payoff is like you said, is worth every penny.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that as well. Because this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, and I've had veterans on to talk about legalizing cannabis for medicinal purposes, for the same reason. In that, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about all this stuff, and they kind of ignore the studies and the anecdotal stories they hear from people who've been through these things. And I think because one of those misconceptions is, again, like, oh, these are just people who want to get high on whatever their drug of choice is, and it's really not helping them. It's tricking them or whatever, and they're just going on this retreat and they're coming home and nothing changes. So I'm glad that you're dispelling a lot of that and saying, like, hey, this isn't necessarily going to be this fun experience. It's going to be tough, but it's going to be worth it in the end. But you also can't just assume this is a magic pill that you're taking. You're going to take your pill and your issues are gone. Your illness is gone. You're going to have to do other things in addition to this.
Absolutely. And then you've got to remember, most of these guys, especially veterans, only have the VA at their disposal. And I can tell you what, I've got 3 personal friends who were treated for PTSD with undiagnosed TBIs, which are traumatic brain injuries from explosions and getting blown up and things like that. And if they're given any kind of antidepressants like Xanax or any of those type of opioids, and everyone's heard the 22 a day thing, basically it causes almost immediate, uncharacteristic suicidal thoughts. And this is a known side effect of that treatment. And luckily, these 3 people are still around today. But I could tell you what, unfortunately, that system, whether it's well-meaning or not, is overwhelmed, and it's not prepared to actually deal with what's going on with this many people coming back from war zones and being traumatized. Yeah. So something has to change. And unfortunately, when we're asking for a global change, at a government level, that takes a long time. And we've got a lot of people that need help, yesterday. So I think this is why the work we're doing is so important.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, as I mentioned in talking to people, even just with medical cannabis, like the pushback they got here in South Carolina specifically, it looked like they were going to pass it with like the most restrictive laws in the country. And then at the last minute, some legislator used some, weird procedural thing to basically kill the bill that looked like it was going to get passed. Like even the pushback on something that other states are doing is tough. So I can't imagine something like this. And it's crazy to me because there is evidence out there that these things work. And these are people, especially in the situations we're talking about, police officers and veterans that we always put up and say that we take care of these folks, they protect us, and we're going to take care of them. But then people are so afraid or unwilling to look into alternative methods of treatment when these people are asking for help. It's disheartening, and I'm sure it's tough for you sometimes, but it sounds like you're pushing to get this, misconceptions changed and finding ways to help the people who protect us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about it, 0.0 people have died from cannabis, yet, and we keep saying we support our veterans, but if a veteran was caught with a joint here, you're going to jail, buddy.
Right, exactly.
This is not how we should treat them, and this is how we do treat them here in South Carolina, which hopefully will change in the near future.
And I'm sure there are legitimate concerns with any new drug, and that goes for when a pharmaceutical company creates one. I mean, we saw what happened with the vaccines and people being opposed to that and their concerns about that. So I get there's always going to be concerns about these types of things, but I think people maybe just need to open up their minds a little bit more and kind of get rid of those preconceived notions they have.
Yeah, and there's plenty of information out there on ayahuasca now. I mean, you can see there are some things that will disqualify you from using these things if you can't safely come off antidepressant meds, or if you're an actual alcoholic. These treatment centers aren't set up to be detox centers.
Right.
And or if you have schizophrenia or things like that, there are things that could possibly make this worse. But generally speaking, it's well tolerated, meaning it doesn't cause actual harm. It may cause discomfort, but not harm. So I always advise people, do your own research. There's plenty of it out there. There's plenty of good documentaries out there, like starting with a Netflix thing. And there's another one called Awakening of the Soul that's on YouTube. And they actually show the Rhythmia Treatment Center if anyone's interested in looking at that. But yeah, I mean, we want people to be comfortable with the decision they're making when they go down there. And obviously don't have any misconceptions of what it can do for them.
Yeah, this isn't just some willy-nilly like, hey, who wants to take a trip? You do? Great, let's go. You guys are, making sure they're prepped for this and are good candidates for this sort of treatment. For those listening, whether they are someone who may think that this could be beneficial to them, or someone who's just like, hey, how can I support this mission? I want to help, police officers and veterans get to take these sort of trips and find help. What is the best way to find information? What do you recommend for everybody to do?
Yeah, well, first off, I mean, I started this thing here in South Carolina, so we'll probably do the vast majority of our fundraising efforts here in South Carolina near Charleston. So, yeah, we're looking for local business owners that would help us provide venues for future events. Share our information out there to not only people who would donate to our mission, but also people who may need the help or be able to help in any way. I mean, whatever that may be, we will take it. We're a brand new organization. We came out basically in June, and we just recently had a few fundraisers and raised enough to send 2 veterans down. Our first one's actually leaving for treatment this Sunday.
Oh, wow.
On the 6th, and we've got another one going the end of the month in November. So it'll be 2 in November for our first year in operation. So I'm pretty happy with that. Next year, I would love to really blow that number out of the water and get a lot more help to a lot more people.
And those listening, the website is warriorshealingnetwork.org. So if you are interested in learning more, there's all sorts of stuff on there. You have FAQs for people who are curious about this thing. You have a section for events when you're going to hold them, and other ways to help. For those who may not need treatment but want to support this mission, that's probably the best place to go. I think you also have an Instagram. Is it at Warriors Healing Network?
It's at Warriors Healing Network 2022.
2022. Okay. And I'll be sure to put that in the show notes as well. So if anybody's interested in learning more. Ray, is there anything that we didn't cover in relation to this that you think is important that we just haven't gotten to? Or is that pretty much the extent of it?
I think that's the extent of it. I just want to make sure that people understand. I mean, it's great to have awareness. So the 22 a day thing raised awareness for veteran suicides and things like that. But to actually do something is a different thing. And I think that's what we're doing. And that's what I'm asking other people who say they support veterans organizations or police officers to do, is actually do something. Whether it's donating, money to our mission or helping us in any way, I could appreciate anything that's thrown at us that will benefit, our end users here.
You mentioned the 22 a day. I think we've mentioned it a couple times. I don't know if we've specifically said that's 22. Is it veterans that die a day by suicide? Is that the number?
That was a number that was put out a few years ago, which they've also come out with new articles saying is probably quadruple that amount.
Wow.
Because they're not the reporting's off, and you're not even taking into account things like reckless behavior or deaths by alcoholism and things that were attributed to
PTSD.
So it's a very high number. One's too many. But,
absolutely.
We do spend all this money training them and doing all these type of things to, make us safe, but we can't, invest in them coming back into society after dealing with all this stuff on our behalf. And I don't think that's fair.
And one of the ways to get back into society is helping with treatments for any, whether it's physical or mental health issues from their service, or police officers as well, as we mentioned, their service is helping them find the appropriate treatment and making sure all available things are accessible for them. So I appreciate you starting this nonprofit and trying to help those folks, and hopefully people listening will at least look into it. I know hearing things like psychedelics and ayahuasca can sometimes make people just have, like we talked about a bunch, just a completely different notion of this stuff. At least look into it, because you may change your mind and it might be something that can help out those, like I said before, that protect us. So hopefully this interview will help with that. That's why I wanted to have you on, because I wanted to learn a little bit more, and I think people listening probably did as well. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to educate me and anybody who's listening about this. And thanks again for your service and the work you're doing for our community.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining Holy City Sinner Radio for another week, episode 63 in the books. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/Holy City Sinner. You can also go to holycitysinner.com/shop, pick up some merchandise. As always, share, like, rate, review the podcast, anything I post on social media or the website. Share it with someone you think may find it interesting. All of that helps gets the name and the word out there, and helps keep the site going strong. I appreciate it. Also want to thank Lindsay Marie Collins of LMC Sound System for producing this in every single episode, Tyler Boone for allowing me to use his music in every episode as well. And as I've already mentioned, thank you to all of you. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Can't wait to be back on the microphone with the next show for you. So be sure, as I said before, to subscribe so you don't miss any of the great interviews that we have coming up. And as always, good night and good luck.